Welcome to the Big Screen Symposium podcast. This session is from the Big Screen Symposium held in Auckland on the 4th and 5th of December 2020. In this session, two-time Academy Award nominated producer Finola Dwyer, whose projects include Brooklyn and An Education, shares her approach to filmmaking using the film Brooklyn as a case study. Finola talks to Carthew Neal, Academy Award-winning producer for Jojo Rabbit, about the response to challenges thrown up during production that ultimately achieved this ambitious film.
So, you've just come back from London. Before we start talking about Brooklyn, I was interested to know what has it been like in London and England this year? Because obviously we've had a big year, the whole world has had a big year. And from New Zealand, you can look out and see what's happening around the world, but what has it actually been like on the ground in the UK as a producer?
I think probably like for everybody, and it's great to be here, by the way, so thank you for inviting me. COVID, like the pandemic, took us all by surprise. So I think for the first, few weeks, it was always like, well, is it like not China recovered in 9 weeks, so we're only looking at 9 weeks at the most. And then as it kind of went on and on, I think, it was just a lot of readjusting and people kind of going, well, we're not going to make anything for a while. So a lot of development totally intensified and the writers were all completely exhausted. That seemed to be for the first few months. And then, I think people found ways to make stuff. Film London, say, production's back at sort of 85%. I'm not sure whether it's really quite as much as that. There's a lot in pre-production, but quite a lot of shows are stopping because the virus has got rather out of hand in the UK. But I think, I think we're very, as, sort of content makers, film and television, we're very resilient anyway. And as a producer, there's always obstacles and a lot of our job's about solving problems. So I think there's real optimism, that we can still get things done. And it's like what can you do rather than what can't you do?
Yeah, I think, every production is almost like, we're very agile because every production is almost like a new beginning. So in that way, of all the industries, I think possibly we're in a good industry, used to a lot of change, right? And so that's pretty normal, despite this year being absolutely extraordinary. So in terms of Brooklyn, the reason why we're talking about Brooklyn today is it was 5 years ago that it was released. But what is amazing, I think, about it is that it was an independent production, that you sourced the rights to the book, you hired the writer, or you collaborated with the writer, you found a director, cast, you sold the film at Sundance, and you then, with your team, went on to be nominated for the Academy Awards. And so that is like a ginormous journey, and I think it's really an aspirational journey to be making an independent film that goes all the way, as is said about these films when they reach the Academy Awards. And so it's pretty aspirational, so I'm really excited to hear more about how that process came about, as much as we can talk about in an hour. So let's start by watching the trailer to just kind of remind us of what the film's about.
Step over this way, please. Get out of the line. Next. Passport, please. Welcome to the United States, ma'am.
Dear Rose, I miss you and Mother and think about you every day. The most important news is that I have a job and I'm in a boarding house.
I was glad to see you finally got some letters from home today.
I wish that I could stop feeling that I want to be an Irish girl in Ireland.
Homesickness is like most sicknesses. It will pass.
Would you dance with me?
I'm not Irish.
So what were you doing at an Irish dance?
I really like Irish girls.
I met somebody, an Italian fella. We're going to Coney Island at the weekend.
But do you have a bathing costume?
Why didn't you tell me to put my costume on underneath my clothes?
I thought you'd know.
Tell me.
I want to ask you something, and you're gonna say, oh, it's too soon. Will you come for dinner and meet my family?
I'd love to.
You like Italian food?
I'm going to say splash anytime I see problems.
Good idea.
Splash!
You just splashed his mother, his father, and the walls.
Let's go again.
Ready?
I should
say that. We don't like Irish people.
Hey.
What? We don't. That is a well-known fact.
It was sudden.
I'm not bury her.
You want to go home, I guess.
How would it be for you if I did go home?
I'd be afraid.
Afraid that I wouldn't come back.
Home is home.
Ireland must seem very backward to you now.
Is that Jim Farrell I saw? He's a catch for someone.
I have a life halfway across the sea.
Your life here could be just as good.
If you go back, I have no protection.
I want you to stay here with me.
Home is home.
I watched the film again last night, and it's a very, very emotional and very funny film, and it's beautiful and like speaks to, it's historic. It's set in 1950s, but it speaks to the idea that we travel, and we've been traveling in love is sort of as difficult across borders, and that speaks to me particularly. So it was really, really beautiful to see the film again. So well done.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it was great. The trailer that I watched, there was just like one of the interesting things, that it's not about the film itself, but it was the billing block was so large. There were so many people involved in this film. And it is, it was a period film shot in 3 locations around the world. So as an independent film, that's like quite an undertaking. Was it, this is a silly question, but was it an easy film to make?
No. And I'll sort of start at the beginning. A friend of mine, an American friend, gave me the book, really because he just thought, he's always like, I don't know what makes a good film, but it was more that he knew that my mother had come from, at a very similar time, from Ireland to New Zealand, and always missed Ireland, and and then kind of the same happened with me going to the UK. Every time I come back to New Zealand every year, I'm like, why am I not living here? And so it spoke to me, but it also struck me that in a way it's a very universal experience, because once we leave home, that relationship to home changes forever, whether it's just going from one part of Auckland to another or changing countries, continents. But the book is I don't know if any of you have read the novel, but it's quite an internal novel. So when I first read it, I loved it, but I was sort of like, I couldn't really see how you'd dramatize it. So I thought about it for a long time, and I also thought it would be a very expensive movie to make, and without a star in the lead role, how could you get 30, 40 million to make it, which is what I thought when I read it that you'd need. And I thought about it for a long time, and then I was in New York and buying another copy, and it was kind of post an education and the Oscars, and I'd sort of figured out in my head how you might be able to do it. So Colm Troy Bean, the friend who gave me the book actually was at at a book sale. He's a rare book dealer in New York. So I thought, well, I'll ask him if Colm has sold the rights. He probably has. So I saw him that weekend, and then by chance I met Colm, his people were in negotiation with someone else to get the rights. He had turned down producers like Scott Rudin, who's a very big and established, successful American producer. And it was just like timing, really, that I met Colm that weekend. And after our lunch, he said, if you want the book, it's yours. And that was all kind of like meant to be. And then I gave it to Nick Hornby, who I just worked with on education. And he really responded to it, and he thought he could find a way to, tell the story. And he wrote a beautiful screenplay. And then it sort of became we had quite a long, I wouldn't say struggle, but it took a long time to find the director. Because Nick actually, when he writes, he doesn't write a lot of prose. He doesn't tell you how to feel. He doesn't say she was devastated. So you've got to read it carefully, and you've got to, he just isn't that kind of writer. And often actually with both the films we did with him, directors who turned those projects down say, God, the script really changed. And we're like, no, not a word's changed, actually. It's just it's sort of almost all there in what he doesn't say. So he's a brilliant writer, but he's a spare he's a spare writer.
So just to sort of step back a bit in terms of, as a producer, when you're looking for work, are you reading a lot of books? Is that a source that you often go to? And are you getting access to those books before they hit the shelves, or are you...
With Brooklyn, I did read it in proof, but I didn't actually go after it for, gosh, it was, a good year, I think. And in a way, it worked in my favour that Colm Tobin had already turned down a lot of people, because with Scott Rudin, he said he just wasn't offering enough money, and he knew other people he had paid more for, his other novelist friends. So that just worked out in my favour. But yeah, a lot of what we do is from novels, yeah.
And as a producer, I think, in terms of talking about you generating this work, you starting from a book as a good source place rather than a director who's maybe written something already. It sort of means that you're imagining it from the very beginning. So could you imagine like the film when you first read the book?
Not when I first read it, because it was very internal. I was just thinking, how could you dramatize it? Because so much was in her head. And then it was like, well, it was all from her point of view, not quite the outside, the inside out, but it was, then I thought if it's always her. Yeah, I started to see it. But the characters were very vivid in his novel. And then how Nick Hornby describes the adaptation is he describes it as, turning the volume up. So he quite likes adapting, quite lean novel, sort of strong stories, but quite lean, that he can then put some flesh on the characters, and which so was in Education was kind of like that too.
And so in the adaptation, did the story begin or end in different places, or was the whole book contained in the screenplay?
He got rid of some of Ailish's family. She had brothers and went to Liverpool first, I think, so he just got rid of that. But it was always clear to me in the book that you would need to take her all the way back to New York. She'd need to be back in Brooklyn and see Tony. So that was the only thing I said to Nick after he read it, is that she's got to go, for a film, you have to take her all the way back. And he totally agreed.
And watching the film, it feels very efficient. It feels a very efficient storytelling. Is that the case in the script? Like, how much did it change from the script to the finished film? Was it broader and or was
Not much, really. I think in terms of the trying to put it together, when it sort of became clear that in a way, because dramas had sort of gone out of fashion at that time too. So distributors and the studios, like the Focus and some of the, the high-end indies, the Searchlights, who ultimately they bought it, there was that, sort of feeling or belief that audiences didn't want to go and see drama, and they didn't want to go and see period drama, and, and it's a women's film, we came up and nothing really happens, we'd get all of those things. So... So over the course of time, it became clear that we certainly weren't going to get 40 million, for it.
And so, when you came up against those sort of people telling you that, like, what was it about the story that you felt like that kept you going? Because there's a lot of noise and setbacks in this whole process.
You always get way more no's, than you get yeses anyway. So. I think I just had a strong instinct that it could really work commercially, and I mean that's the most important thing, that there's an audience for it. And if there's not if you can't get the budget that you first envisage, or like, and our first budgets were over $25 million US, and we ended up making it for just under 11. And I wouldn't have really thought that was possible, but then it was just trying to figure out how to do it and how to do it well. And during the course, to go back to your question of what changed in the script, when we got it down to the sort of just under 11, there were some scenes that needed to go. So I just would talk to Nick about them. And like he had a scene where they did they took the subway or the train out to Coney Island. And that was going to be very expensive to do. And I said to him, it's a scene that could kind of hit the cutting room floor anyway, potentially. And he's like, no, it's totally fine to drop it, but just make Coney Island really good. It's like, okay. Yeah. So he was and like I'd say nearly every film I do that has a completion bond, for those of you who know what that is, I always have a couple of scenes worked out with the director and writer if they're separate, that we could drop if we run into trouble. And that always satisfies the bond, like rather than, sort of slash and burn, or just know that you've got scenes that actually could go if we absolutely had to. So we had a couple of those, and we don't miss them at all. I think they probably would have hit the cutting room floor.
And so obviously having Nick Hornby writing the script is a fantastic relationship and a fantastic name. So, the first step in the process was getting that script. And then what was the process? Because like you said, you had to really adjust the budget to the market. But what was the next step in the process in terms of figuring out what that price would be or what the vision of the film would be?
I think getting a director and casting. And we didn't, I had sort of thought chances were that we would end up with a director who either was a sort of, understood or had experience of the immigrant experience, which is actually with John Crowley. He was Irish, but he had moved to the UK and he had worked in America quite a lot on Broadway. He's a theatre and film director and TV. But it just took a little long time. And then we attached Rooney Mara to play the role that ultimately Saoirse played. And I should say, when I optioned the novel, Saoirse was 15. And I remember the day her agent rang me and said, I know Rooney's attached, but if anything ever happens, just know that Saoirse loves the book. And I'm like, how old is she now? And she was like, 18 then. So I was like, okay. So sometimes this slow journey works in your favour, because she was absolutely, she was sort of perfect. But and John sort of, he fell off a different project. Our original director fell off. John came on to ours. Rooney came off it, because actually a lot of the directors who wanted to work with Rooney wanted to make something much darker and kind of gutsier, really, which wasn't what Brooklyn was, And and then Rooney felt so she, which totally understandable, she wandered off. And it was kind of great because Saoirse was old enough, but the combination of working with the director, and this business is so fickle, so you have to just kind of keep pushing very firmly. It's like, oh, someone, director, they're not hot at the minute, and you come up across that all the time. But I was very confident in John from all the theatre work I'd seen, and he had a really good handle on the story, and he's brilliant with performances, and it's a real performance piece. So, and then Saoirse, she had been Oscar nominated as a, young actress in Atonement, but her kind of the last 3 films she'd done, they hadn't been great films, nothing to do with her. So distributors would go, oh, audiences don't want to see her, and you'd go, what are you talking about? She's an amazing actress. So we kind of knew that we weren't making life easy for ourselves, but actually it's really important to hold on to that sort of integrity of what you want to do and not cast the wrong person or go with a director who's hot, but actually you kind of go, do they really understand the story? Because then the film won't be any good. So it was just like really always keeping the sort of, the story and the integrity of the project kind of firmly front and centre in your mind.
And was that unusual to go to, because to me it seems a little bit unusual to go to an actress ahead of, initially to Rooney ahead of a director. Is that something that was unusual to you, or is that quite normal?
It does happen quite a lot, actually. But I think it was after we just hadn't got any traction with directors. So we thought, well, why don't we, and as is the way with the American agencies, they'll give your script to actors and they'll say, so-and-so wants to play it and so-and-so, So, we met with Rooney, I met with her, and then Nick met with her, and she was great. And her grandparents are Irish, and she's a phenomenal actress. And but she was just off Dragon Tattoo, so a lot of the directors, they're sort of auteur directors too. So that's the other thing. The script was in such good shape, so a lot of auteur directors don't necessarily want to come on to something that's, kind of so perfectly formed in some ways.
Right.
So it's a kind of interesting dilemma. So when we weren't getting traction with directors, we thought, well, actually, Rooney would be fantastic, and let's attach her.
And when you start that conversation, do you say, I mean, is it saying we're going to go to a director next, and does the actor and the agents become part of the discussion of approval of who that director, like, are you welcoming them into that discussion?
Yeah, totally. It wasn't approval, but we totally talked to really about it, and it was great. And, these sorts of things happen all the time. And, the great thing was we had a really good relationship and do have a great relationship with Rini, so we'll do something in the future for sure. And it was, she almost like she really got too old and Saoirse got old enough. It's kind of right. So, there's just, a lot of luck and, plays into your hand.
One of the interesting things, because all the people you're talking about are really actually experienced and well-known names. And so when you say people were saying they weren't, big enough to support this film, just to raise you're really saying raise the finance to the budget that you wanted, because if you were wanting to make a film for a couple of $1 million, I'm sure it would have been much easier. So it was a little bit about the scale that you were the bar you were setting yourself, and knowing you needed to raise that money and looking for the appropriate cast and package.
Yeah, and while that was all good, we probably got the budget down to about 18, and that was still too much. And then it was a really great producer, Jeremy Thomas, without having read the script. He just said to me, with those elements, as in Saoirse and John, he's like, I think you need to make it for, under 12. So I was like, okay, now I've got to figure out how we can get another 6 million. Because we shot in Ireland, we shot in Dublin, we shot on location in Ireland. So we moved everybody, on location for 10 days or something. And then we did most of Brooklyn and Montreal, and then we went to New York for Coney Island. And for those of you who've seen the film, the kind of brownstone street, you can't find that street anywhere, and it just sells that you're in Brooklyn, so it's kind of keeping the magic alive. So we did a day where Saoirse was in and out of outfits. I think there was 14 scenes or something. And she's just incredible, sort of old Saoirse, young Saoirse. And then we did a day at Coney Island, and it was the last day we could have shot at Coney Island before they were opening for the summer. So we just snuck in. And how we did it in the end, and I'd done it on a tiny little film years before, was we were just a very small group that travelled those countries, and we picked up, so the designer was on his own. He didn't have any art director, anybody. The cinematographer just had his focus puller. And so it was everybody really buying into kind of that, okay, we'll just work with, locals. So it really pushed us all outside our comfort zone, but it worked.
And so that was the end plan. So the first plan was to shoot in New York.
Yeah.
And then that's where the main cost savings were, when you started to look at trying to bring the budget down?
Yeah, a combination really of having less people, moving around with less people, but also then it's a union film, as you know, if you shoot in America, so that adds a whole extra layer. I mean, in terms of SAG union, because it was still union shoot those 2 days. Yeah, there was just a lot of knock-on costs if you shoot in America. But it was a combination. It was sort of a combination of things, because we were always going to shoot in Ireland as well.
Well, the film looks so big, and it has such scope to it. So you don't feel like you're missing. You've cobbled it together, or you've reduced the budget. But did you ever feel, as you were, slashing the budget down to that number, was that the lowest you thought you could do it at, and there was just no way? Because it's an interesting thing of sort of matching the production cost and your vision with this market person telling you it has to be this number for the elements you're putting in.
Yeah, and I suppose it wasn't ever anybody saying it has to be. It's just like as you said, every kind of project has its sort of market value, I suppose, and you've just got to go, can I make it, and it had become quite a personal project for me at this point too, and I didn't want to just make a film, I wanted to make a really great film. So it's like, how do you keep that bar really high? I mean, I just was like, how can I do it for this little money? Can we do it well? And really, I think deciding to do it as a co-production was actually the only way we could even raise that much money, because we weren't going to get, 11 odd million from the market, because it came from structuring it as a co-production. And we made up a sort of a lookbook of what we were looking for our Brooklyn locations. And then my assistant did a chart of all the different like tax incentives and credits you can get. And we sent that round to a lot of places. And Canada, you know, had not Toronto so much, but Montreal, it was kind of like, actually, should go and have a look there because that might work creatively. It was a combination of, you know, creative first and then what are the tax incentives? So, you know, big part of the budget, I didn't actually work out the percentage, but it might even be as much as 80% was from like soft money. So the equivalent of a film commission in the UK, because that was a UK, Canada, Ireland, and the Irish equivalent to the film commission and telefilm, and then tax credits, pre-sales. So it was sort of like, you know, building it.
All those names on the billing block.
Yeah.
Represent.
So sort of that was like, I think it was something like, you know, maybe it wasn't quite as much as 80%, 70, 80% was from, you know, like soft money. So you're sort of like numbers from your sales agent, then it was only for the commercial money, which was the gap, you know.
And so at the point that you went to these partners, you had Saoirse on board and John and your script. That was your sort of package that you were taking around. And so from that moment, what was the sort of time frame from taking it out to getting into pre-production?
That's a good question. And I should say, when you say, you know, I mean, like Saoirse now, you know, everything changed for her sort of with Brooklyn, and then she did the 2 films with Greta. So, but before that, there had been these sort of raft of film, you know, as I say, it had nothing to do with her. They just weren't very good. So Saoirse wasn't Saoirse when she made Brooklyn, you know. She sort of became Saoirse again. And she's like the young Meryl Streep of her generation for sure. She's phenomenal. So, and John as well. You know, it's like interesting how, you know, time just, you know what it's like. Everything can turn on a dime, which is what's great about this business too, because everything can turn on a dime. So, but the process, I remember meeting with Emery, who played Tony, in New York. I think it was like maybe the beginning of, like, it was London Film Festival. I'd been to the opening and then I met with him about 3 days later. So that was probably October. And we were shooting by the end of March. But I went to Canada to scout it. The director couldn't come. So he was like, well, see what you think. I went to Toronto and to Montreal, met with Telefilm. I'd already talked to them on the phone, met with them, met with potential co-producers. Because to do a co-production, you have to have partners in each of these countries, and you've got to find the right partners. They didn't think it could happen that fast because telefilm is actually quite a kind of slow, you know, machine. When I said we wanted to be shooting by the end of March, but we were. So that was sort of like October time. So it's still like 6 months.
Which seems really fast to get a co-production together, because you are often, with soft money, you're working to deadlines of funding deadlines, which can slow things down, whereas the market money can move a little bit faster normally. So did you have that plan sort of lined up and you were, you know, going knocking on doors, or was it sort of a bit more?
Not really, because I went to Canada to explore if it could work. And once I thought it could work, it was like, okay. And I'd never been to Montreal, and actually, you know, when I think it was like the 70s, when everything kind of moved, the sort of business moved out of Montreal when they, you know, became French speaking, a lot of the sort of like heavy business went to Toronto. So there were a lot of these amazing empty buildings, you know, banks, municipal buildings. And so they were perfect for our department store and where they got married. And then a lot of the architecture in Montreal is done by the same architects who did some of the kind of classic, you know, buildings like Empire State in New York. So it actually doubles for sort of New York, Brooklyn incredibly well. And which I didn't know till I went there.
And so when you went on your scout, you were sort of doing both, like you were still location scouting and looking for finance.
Yeah,
sort of combined.
and co-producer partners who would need to run all the telefilm and apply, because we couldn't apply for those funds. Yeah.
Right. And so then, you know, it feels like we've already talked about like quite a number of years, and the pre-production hasn't started. It's a long process, right? This putting these films together.
Yeah.
Once you got the green light to start, what was obviously what were the sort of the process then, and what was sort of like some of the stumbling blocks that came up, and because now you've got a production that's less money than half the money you originally anticipated. You were traveling around the world to 3 different locations, but you've got the green light to make it. So it's sort of starting now, but you're putting the team together. What were some of the and maybe talking about like what were some of the issues around how you put the team together, the pre-production team and the HODs?
Yeah, there were a lot of challenges after that. Like Telefilm said they'd commit a certain amount of money, then very close to closing of the financing, they changed their mind and slashed it. And anyway, then they went back up, but not quite to what they had. And it was a very bizarre process. Then they don't sign off on their agreement, so you can't use that they don't sign the IPA, so you can't bank on their money. So then we had to, and then did Sodec, so then we had to find someone to underwrite nearly 2 million Canadian, or we had a 2 million gap, and the BBC Films wouldn't do it, and like, it was
hair-raising.
It was, yeah, it was like literally putting one's house on the line, which wouldn't do that again. But it was, and I, everyone said, oh, Telefilm will be good for the money, but they just don't do this. But like nobody had said they don't do that till, like it was like a best kept secret or something. So there were a lot, and there were things like Tony's family, and the little boy who's a New Yorker. We told our Canadian partners this, that John Crowley, the director, was going to work with his theatre casting director in New York to find that family, because they have very little screen time. So, and you always want to cast the best actors you can, always. And so this great casting director in New York, he found Tony's family. It was great, we had found them. And then our Canadian co-producer said, oh, you can't cast those people because under, Telefilm law, I think you could only have one American actor. I can't remember exactly now. So then it was like, John's like, what am I going to do? And he had looked at Canadians and didn't find what he was after. And with a film like Brooklyn, like it's moving, you have to kind of like establish these characters, and yeah, they've just it's got to be like really brilliant. And during trying to find co-production partners in Canada, I met quite a lot of people in Toronto. So I had a couple of phone a friends, and I said, what do I do? Like, is this a thing? And they said, oh, it is, but you can apply, Telefilm has an exception to the rule. And of course, I couldn't say to my co-producers, this is an exception to the rule, you idiots. I had to say, oh, apparently, I just heard that there's this thing called the exception to the rule. Do you know about that? And it was right down to the wire. I think it was like 3 days before we were going to shoot that scene, which was, very early in our schedule in Montreal. They agreed that we could, I think we replaced 2 of them, but we kept the little boy, and we kept one of his brothers.
Who are so great. They're so great.
Yeah, but it was just like, you've got to hold your nerve and not just go, the easy thing to do would have just been like, oh, we just have to recast it, But I'm always since I've been producing really, and maybe even when I started in this business, it's like I won't take no for an answer. It's like there has to be a solution. And there is always a solution. I really believe that too. But it was kind of so important to keep those actors, or the key ones in that, really, really important.
Well, the film is so much about rides on the chemistry of all the actors too. I mean, were you able to get them in a room together before you started because they were from different parts of the world, or was that something pre-Zoom that you couldn't do a Zoom chemistry test?
No, there were no chemistry tests.
There were no chemistry tests at all?
No. Emery came over to Ireland when we were doing rehearsals, so he rehearsed with Sish and Donal. But actually, just to back up to what you were saying about putting the team together, it was, I mean, I don't know what it's like for you, and you've worked out of the country now as well, but, you know, we'll often in how we achieve these things, especially on limited budgets, and let's face it, you rarely have enough, doesn't really matter what the budget is. We like to work with the same people because there's a shorthand and, you know, it's tight, you're tight already, and there's a lot of good reasons to do that. But when you do a co-production, you have to have heads of department from the different countries. So the team went out the window, and we worked with the cinematographer, French-Canadian cinematographer and designer, who both of those two in particular, they were absolutely brilliant. Yves Bollinger is one of the best DPs I've worked with, I'd say. He's so fast, so good, so creative, so into solving problems. And, you know, we shot that, I was going to check the number of days, but it was 5-day weeks everywhere because in Canada and Ireland, they don't do 6-day weeks. Or if you do, it's it was so out of our budget range. And we shot in 3 countries, so it was, I think it was like 32 days or something. Anyway, it wasn't a lot. And without working with, you know, and you always try and work with the best people you can, for sure. But Eve was very experienced, and he had just done Wild with Reese Witherspoon, which Nick had done the screenplay for, and my friend had produced, so she just said he was amazing, and so that was just really great luck. And my regular designer I work with, a Kiwi actually, Andrew McAlpine, he was going to do it and then couldn't do it, and his American agent said, why don't you look at Francois? And he was just incredible. So sometimes being pushed outside your comfort zone can be a really great thing. And that was really good to be reminded, actually, that, and we worked with an editor who hadn't done a lot because we couldn't afford, some of the editors we worked with before, but he's a brilliant editor and he's since been Oscar nominated. And again, it's great to actually go, right, let's just roll the dice. And he was like, I don't need an assistant, but I'll come on the road with you. I'll do everything myself. And yeah.
And so when you were choosing these people, what were the did you have to go to them explaining that you were on a shoestring? Was that part of the initial pitch to these people you didn't know, or was that
Yeah, it's a good pitch, isn't it? We've got no money.
Yeah.
I think it's always really good to be realistic about what the challenges are with something, and if it includes, look, we've got limited money, so we've all got to be creative. But it was often asked how we made it for so little, and my script supervisor, who did come with us on the journey to the 3 countries, because I think, and probably from being an editor, that was a kind of an essential person that needed to be with us. And when we were on location in Ireland, she rang me in my room, and we've done a lot of jobs together, and she's like, Finola, this hotel doesn't have cotton sheets. And so that would be, when people ask me, I'd say we stayed in hotels without cotton sheets. And as in, we all got in a minivan together, which probably you guys all do anyway. But it was just it was sort of just down and dirty, and that it was great, and everybody was up for that. And you know, really, when you're sort of interviewing or talking to people, some people would just go, oh no. I mean, I had line producers who didn't want to do the job, first assistant directors who changed their mind. Because it was a combination of not really thinking it could be done for either the money and the time, or just going, I can work on a studio movie and go to Pinewood every day and see my family, and I don't really want to have to do something that sounds too hard, you know.
One of the things I've learned working overseas is that, you know, as a producer, you've got the people who you deal with, HODs and the director and the writer and the cast, but when you're bringing those HODs with you, if they don't have other people around them, it makes their job a lot harder because they're having to work with locals. And so it's often hard. They all want to bring their own people, right? And so was that sort of something that you were having to trim down? Was that a really difficult?
Oh yeah, that's what I mean. We were this tiny group. We were like a traveling, really small, because really that was another way of being able to make sure I wasn't compromising what the director and everybody had to put on, money to spend putting it on screen. And so to stay somewhere that was like really cheap and without cotton sheets, I mean, I know it sounds funny, but actually that's way cheaper than staying somewhere not, and that money isn't going to, and as long as it's, comfortable enough.
Clean.
And we were never, I mean, and actually all the sort of like UK or non-Irish crew when we were on Vacation Island, we stayed at a place further away than the Irish crew because the Irish crew get paid for travel time as well as their lunch break. So they were put actually in the better place right by like 2 minutes from where we were shooting. But some of them had to come and check where we were because they thought, we must be in the smart place. And then you'd hear them saying, oh my God, you guys are in a real dump, And be like, that's right, we are because we don't get paid to travel to work. So, it was all that sort of thing. But it was, and that wasn't ideal because in an ideal world, we would have all been staying together because that's just better for communication and everything. But the places we were shooting were too tiny. So, but no, so that was part of when we met with the HODs was like, this is how it's going to be. So if that isn't how you want to work, which we totally get, don't come on the journey because you're going to be on your own and you're going to have to work with strangers in 3 different countries.
Yeah, sounds like a great adventure to be leading people through. Scary one. But you've talked a little bit also about staying agile and all the changes that you had to make from your original vision, but while holding on to what you wanted the film to be. Were there other examples of that in the creative process too, staying open through the process where things change, like we talked about from script to the final cut, but in the rehearsal process or in the shooting process where because you're on such a tight budget, were you able to make changes and adjust, or was it really you were sticking to your plan?
No, we did make some changes, and I think it's always, good to sort of like, especially like a good idea can come from anywhere, any time, or sometimes something doesn't work out the way the director had envisaged, so you need to have a change. You can't be that rigid that you go, no, it's this way or no way. But during rehearsals in Dublin, we did a read-through, and Nick Hornby came over for that, and Julie Walters was there. We didn't have everybody, but it was a very kind of fun read. And at the end of the read-through, Saoirse and Donal came over to me and Nick, and Saoirse was like, Donal's missing a scene. And actually, if you look at Brooklyn, there's sort of doubles, there's sort of like mirror doubles of every sort of like, those 2 characters have a scene, then she'll have a scene with the other character on the other side. And the novel's like that actually as well. And Donal was absolutely, Nick was like, they talked about it for really not a long time, and Nick's like, you're absolutely right. Yeah, you need a beat there. So he went into the director's office and wrote the scene, and it's kind of word for word what he wrote that day in the film. So I think that was kind of great. And Donal was very smart. When John and I met him after he'd read the script, he said, I love it. My job is to make her want to stay with me. So he knew exactly what he had to get Saoirse's character to do. And it's so, that's what I love this job when those sorts of moments happen, because you're just like, there's an actor, top of his game, he totally knows. It's simple, it's so simple. There's never going to be overthinking it. And actually when we were shooting in Ireland, we did the scene at the wedding where they're dancing, and at that moment, you are wanting her to stay with him. So we were like, oh my God, Emery's going to have to be so good, because otherwise, it's like, it's not going to work when she goes back. And we knew that anyway, and we didn't design it like that to shoot to shoot the beginning and the end first. I mean, you wouldn't if you had the choice, you wouldn't shoot it like that. But it kind of actually, it worked in the sense of we were like, oh my God. He's like, at that moment, you just wanted those 2 to stay together. Sometimes you can kind of end up getting lucky like that.
I love the cast read through in pre-production. For me, it's sort of the one time you sort of hear the story as one before you sort of break it up into a million different pieces while you're shooting. And so I really hold on to that read through as quite a important memory through the shooting process. I think it's it's really cool to hear that even in those moments you can be changing the script as you're going through. So once you got through to the other side of the shoot, and you're an editor, so you've got an editor background. You were an editor, but what was the editing process like? And from when you started editing through till when you got to a locked cut and.
It took us a while, actually. And sometimes it does, take a while to find that sort of best version of the film. And actually, in education was a bit like that as well. Sometimes it's kind of a bit hard to put your finger on it. Like the end worked totally, but we did. I was telling you, I really am a believer in the kind of testing process. And even when I worked in editing in New Zealand, we used to, kind of do cuts and take them and test them. Which is really just like playing it to a sort of target audience and sitting in the theatre watching their reactions and feeling them. It's so, I always found it so helpful. And it's no good showing it to friends I've never found. It's really just like strangers off the street, but who would be your target audience to see the movie. So we did one of our first screenings to our financiers, which was disastrous, really. They were like, get rid of the editor, start the film in New York. It's really boring up to that point. Do this, do that. So it was a bit like, and the director was like, oh, what are we going to do now? Are we still going to have that screening tomorrow? And I'm like, yeah, we should absolutely have the screening tomorrow. And if the 250 strangers feel the same way as our backers, then we'll just have to kind of like take it from there. And it was early in the process. And that's the thing, it's a bit like writing a script and having drafts. It's not like your first draft is never going to be perfect. It's a process. And through editing and honing and, so you have to respect the process and not just think it's all got to be perfect, the minute it gets out the gate. So I'm a real believer in that. And I don't, panic, not outwardly anyway. But I wasn't actually. I was just I was excited to show it to strangers. And it went really well. And for the director and editor, they kind of knew exactly what they wanted to do just from, where people were restless and then they fill out cards, and that was helpful to an extent. But actually, I think sitting there, especially in that first screening, so that we just worked away on the cut, and then we did more screenings and, more audience screenings and got it to where we wanted to. I mean, I think for some of our backers, it was when they'd come to that read-through, because Nick Hornby's actually very funny. And Julie Wood, it was such a hilarious read-through. I think for a minute they all thought we were making a totally different movie. So in some ways that also might have, they're like, oh, it's not as funny as the read-through. It's like, well, we're not making a radio play. It's like, so, but it all worked out really well. And I think it was just holding our nerve. And I think, someone who worked for the distribution company in the UK was like, well, if you take it off to Sundance and you don't sell it, just be prepared that you're going to have to replace the score or do this or do that. And it's really just sometimes like shutting out that noise. I mean, I think it's important to listen because, and even, the feedback, and some of the feedback was really helpful. Don't get me wrong. I'm just, probably exaggerating slightly, but it's important to listen because the chances are there's something not quite working and it might not be what they're identifying or saying, but it's just, and that's actually where the test screenings with, the 250 strangers really helped us hone it. And it took us a while to get the beginning right because there was an element we had added which we were able to take away, which was much better. And also we had some art department issues on the first day of shoot, which was the opening shot. There were just some things, so it did just take us a while to, figure that out. And once we did, then we were sort of off, it was good.
And with that screening with the financiers, did they get to come to the test screening with the audience, or was it how did you get them out of their sort of rut?
Well, we sort of we tend to just do those and put them in the budget and do it ourselves for our own process rather than it be like a big official NRG type one. We'd always invite them. I don't think anybody came to that first one.
So did you have to then convince them that
No,
they were
I
wrong?
think, well, it's a sort of process, isn't it? We're like, it played well, and actually it was having a lot of, the Canadians weren't so involved, really. I mean, we'd give them all the cuts, obviously, and, be open to anybody's feedback. I think it's just, and look, I think they are probably, distributors and your sort of BBC and Film 4s, they're involved. They put a little, a bit of money in a lot of films, and not every film, it's hard to make a good film, and it's hard to make one that works. I mean, no one ever sets out to make a bad one, but it is. You need a lot of elements and, to come together. And I think they probably just thought, oh, it's okay, but it's probably not one of those ones that's, and then they sort of move on a bit to the next ones they've got to focus on. So, no, I mean, they supported us, making the film we wanted to make. And I think if those test screenings hadn't gone well, it would have been, we would have...
And there would have been scores that might have come out of those you could use to sort of...
they never... I'm not entirely sure that they were even convinced by that. It's just people have their own views sometimes. Yeah, maybe if they didn't come to those screenings, but like there was a scene we had shot in a sort of near hurricane in Montreal that we always knew we needed to reshoot, but we sort of shot it because we just thought, oh, we just may not ever get to do it again. And in post-production, nobody was going to give us money to shoot that, to reshoot it. But fortunately, we sort of had enough contingency to sort of not gamble, but kind of go, all right, we'll use the bulk of that money to do this reshoot, which I do remember people being a bit surprised we were doing it, but we had control over the budget, so we used it for that, and it was really, really worth doing. It was the last scene, for those of you who've seen the film, where Ailish Saoirse's character goes back to New York and is talking to the girl. And so their hair was whipping around like this. Yeah. And, it was all sort of...
wild. Not what you wanted at the end of the movie.
So, yeah.
And so once you had that, we've only got about 10 minutes to go. And if you've wanted to ask any questions, I'm going to look at the Slido app shortly. But the journey from, you finish, you lock the film and you start submitting it for festivals and you got into Sundance. But can you talk about... if that process is, there's so many places where a film can fail, I suppose, in that journey, but it didn't happen for you. What was some of the more nerve-wracking moments in that process? Was it nerve-wracking figuring out if you were going to get into Sundance, or was that something you thought was going to happen?
Well, we weren't sure whether Sundance was the right place to launch the film, and we only just got it finished in time. I took it over and, showed it to CAA, I think it was like in November, and then they showed it because CAA were doing the US sale for us, and they showed it to Sundance. Yeah, because with An Education, they took it because it was like the birth of a new talent and a new star in Kerry Mulligan. And with this, it was sort of like, they don't tend to take period, quite straight period films aren't really what they go for. So, but we sort of came up with like it was a transformative role for Saoirse. That was, a big part of it. And so they did, so they took it and we kind of thought, look, it worked for An Education, so why not, in a way, like, is Cannes the place to sell it? Do we wait? It was all of that. And we thought, well, if Sundance doesn't take it, then we can submit to Cannes. So we hadn't submitted to anybody else, like Sundance was the first. And then, that was great. The screening was amazing. We had this incredible bidding war. But like when it started, the screening started, I was like, oh, it's too loud. Nobody's ever going to buy this. It's too loud. You just like talk to yourself. And I had a director friend sitting next to me who wasn't the director. And I'm like, is it too loud? And anyway, it was kind of crazy what goes through your mind. And so that was all great. And then, we went with Searchlight and that's January. And then that's a long time before they relaunch it, if you like, in Toronto for the kind of awards. And there's a lot of films come and go. And it was the same journey with An Education, Sundance all the way through to the Oscars. It's over a year. And so when that screening in Toronto then becomes such an essential screening, it's like, will we just be like yesterday's news? Because it was 8 months ago. And then it's like, then Searchlight is, you're sort of like, I don't know, in the gym of some hotel, you'll know this, and you're seeing these ads for your movie, and you're like, but it's only on 4 screens in America, and they're spending all this money for like, so it's but they like, it's so brilliant. They totally know what they're doing, but it's just nerve-wracking. Like, yeah, will you get nominations at the Golden Globes? Oh, we only got 1. Oh, okay. And that was exactly the same as in education, you know.
And so when you were making that, because you'd had the experience with an education, when you're in that bidding war, which is like the best place you can be at Sundance, and there's multiple offers, was the decision to go with Searchlight based on the highest price, or was it based on something else?
It wasn't the highest price, actually. We had higher. I think we all, you know, Nick, who's a partner with us on it, and John Crowley, the director, you know, we all wanted to work with Searchlight. Nick had just had a great experience with them on Wild. You know, they're really classy. We'd love working with Sony Classics, who were totally, you know, right up there as well. But yeah, we just felt we loved their pitch, and we just felt, let's go with Searchlight, and they weren't the highest. It was just like, yeah, let's go with them.
And were they selling you the awards conversation?
Yeah,
was that
everybody
part of their pitch?
Everyone was. Yeah, everybody was. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was amazing too, because at the end of the screening, when the credits were still rolling, Torsten and Micah, the guys who were selling it, both came over and said, "You're going to be fine. You know, the reviews are great." And I'm like, "What, already?" And they were like, basically the tweets, everything was coming on board so far, you know, coming in so fast, and that was a real change from an education, like, as in how it had just changed, and you know, it happened so quickly. So they could have been coming over and going, "Oh, it's not looking very good."
It's a pretty exciting, heady time from that point on, because you've done your job, you've created a great film, and now you're part of the showcase that's sort of going to roll it out, and obviously very nerve-wracking in these moments, because there's like you say, very flippant stages, but each time you kind of get to the next stage, another level opens up, doesn't it? That's what it feels
and
like.
each stage I think is the most important stage. That's what I always say, from like, when you're working on the script to getting it together, putting, you know,
Hey, I should have looked at this a lot earlier, because there's some really, there's a lot of people putting thumbs up on some of these questions. So I will switch to that now, Finola. So one of the questions here is, do you find it easier to get things off the ground and onto the screen overseas? And if so, why would it? If so, what would make it easier other than budget? Living overseas, do you think that has put you in a better position in terms of getting projects up and running?
I don't know, because I've been there a long time, but part of choosing, Brooklyn today, and just talking to Jackie and the team behind this event, is that it's really to think about working with partners in other countries, that you can actually get quite a lot of, money that way, and it's not about sacrificing creative vision, it's about how you can achieve something at maybe sort of a higher budget, the way you want to do it. I've been really, I went to London because my then husband was there, not because I thought, I'd never thought I'd leave New Zealand at all. But I've been really lucky, and I've worked with lots of amazing people. So it's a lot of the stories we choose to tell, they're not necessarily on paper the most obvious or the most commercial, so none of them particularly have been, or I work with a director who's never directed before, like someone like Dustin Hoffman, who was seen as like either a great idea or a terrible idea, and he was genius to work with. But it's about, I don't mind taking risks, but I like taking risks actually, but it doesn't always make it the most easiest to put together. So I don't know if it's necessarily been overseas or not. Yeah, helps. I don't know.
Okay, so another question. Any production laws that you think New Zealand could benefit from? In a session yesterday, panellists said New Zealand creators were undervalued and overworked. So I think there's sort of two questions, but I suppose it's sort of, is there anything that you think New Zealand could be doing differently that might change its sort of place in the world's filmmaking?
Yeah, when I said telefilm laws, they're not really laws, they're just co-production rules. Is that what that means, do you think? Talking about, I don't, yeah.
I think it's...
And who's overworked and under, what, creators, as in writers?
Creatives, writers,
right,
yeah. I think because the budgets here are lower for local production, it means that, you know, there's like a ceiling very, you know, early on in terms of how much you can pay.
Well, I suppose you can look at co-production as a way to, I mean, I could have never ever made Brooklyn if I hadn't done it as a co-production, because the market was basically probably telling me it was like about a $5 million film, you know, which we could have never made it for that. Never. Well, not a film I would have wanted to make or see. And doing it as a co-production, you know, was really the only way to do it. So I think you can think outside what's available in New Zealand. Don't just limit your vision to here all the time. I mean, sometimes it might be great to just do it here and make complete sense too. Does that sort of answer
I think it does, yeah. I think the thing here is it's difficult, even if you have a success, the next day, it doesn't mean that there's a scale that you can go on to a higher budget project straight away, because there is just this limit. So I think co-production is a really, a good suggestion for that. So when looking for directors, what do you look for from them to assess if they're right for the project?
I think this is, you know, really having an affinity and you know, that you just really feel they kind of understand the story and the work. It's, you know, I think I'll often look for directors that I think are great with performance, you know, can know how to tell a story. I've demonstrated they're good storytellers. And I think, you know, filmmaking is such a collaborative process, and you want your director to have a vision for sure. You know, that they've got a real handle and command of what it is they want to tell. And we love working with writer-directors as well, but it's just if they're coming on to a script you've developed, we never want them to be like a director for hire. We want them to come with their vision for absolute sure, because they're the director, you know.
So in that situation, and even with John, were you asking, when you sent the script out, were you asking them to pitch back their vision?
Yeah, absolutely. And their take, I suppose. Yeah, what is it that, you know, because sometimes you can meet great directors and they actually want to tell a different story than is there in the screenplay, you know.
Yeah.
And that's fine, but it's like not going to work.
Not the right match,
yeah.
Hey, and this last question takes us around to the distribution side, which we were just talking about. How much involvement did you have in the theatrical release of the film, or were you relatively hands-off once it was in the hands of the distributors?
Yeah, quite a lot. You know, in terms of be across the trailers and all the materials. Someone like Searchlight, they'll absolutely let you be part of the process, but as you probably experience, they're really, really good at what they do as well. They understand their market, you know, they know their market, but they'll still be respectful and listen to your kind of input But I think in terms of being involved, you stay as involved as you need to be, and sometimes if you are fortunate to get on this sort of awards journey, then getting the talent to turn up and keep coming back, even though sometimes it might seem like completely pointless, because it's like, here we are in LA again, what are we doing exactly? That's an important part of it as well, yeah.
And you're like you're saying, you're sort of like the gel between the distributor who they might not know as well and the relation to the origin of the film.
Well, often just picking up the phone to your actors or your director and writer, whatever, and saying it's really important. But the agents play a big part of that as well. Yeah, they can be really useful.
Cool. Well, thank you, Finola, for taking us through that journey. One of the things I just really admire about your career is that you are really passionate, because this is an enormous, I don't know how many years it was from when you first discovered that book, but I think all of your films that I've seen, I can see that you have a real high sense of quality that you're trying to achieve, and I aspire to be a producer like you, so thanks for being here and thanks for sharing that with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
The Big Screen Symposium 2020 was brought to you by Script to Screen and J&A Productions. We gratefully thank our event partners, the New Zealand Film Commission, New Zealand On Air, Te Māngai Paho, Images and Sound, Screen Auckland and AUT. Voiceover is by me, Lalaina Feonati, and music by Poddington Bear.